The first thing Marcus Chin noticed about planet Valeros wasn't the twin suns casting everything in golden light, or the crystalline spires that jutted from the landscape like frozen lightning. It was the silence that fell over the spaceport the moment he stepped off his transport ship. Every conversation stopped. Every movement ceased. Dozens of tall, ethereal beings with luminescent skin and eyes like captured starlight turned to stare at him. The Valerians had been expecting him, but seeing a human in the flesh was apparently still shocking. Marcus adjusted his worn leather jacket and ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. The diplomatic mission to Valeros was his first real assignment since leaving military service, and he couldn't afford to mess it up. The delicate alliance between Earth and the Valerian Empire depended on establishing trust, and that started with respecting their customs. "Welcome, human," said a tall male Valerian with silver markings across his pale blue skin. "I am Ambassador Kellen. We are honored by your presence." "The honor is mine," Marcus replied, offering a slight bow as he'd been taught. "I'm Marcus Chen, representing the Terran Council." As they walked through the spaceport, Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations in the melodic Valerian language. He'd studied it for months, but their rapid speech was difficult to follow. What he did catch made his stomach tighten. "Never seen one before. So small and dark. The dragons will not approve." The dragons. Marcus had read about them in the briefing materials, but the descriptions had seemed too fantastical to believe. Massive, intelligent creatures that had bonded with the Valerians thousands of years ago, serving as both guardians and guides. The relationship was considered sacred, untouchable by outsiders. They traveled by hover transport through the capital city of Lumina, where buildings seemed to grow from the ground like organic sculptures. Everything was designed around curves and flowing lines, as if the entire city were frozen music. But Marcus's attention was drawn skyward, where enormous shadows occasionally passed between the towers. "The Lumina Dragons," Ambassador Kellen explained, following his gaze. "They patrol the city, ensuring our safety. You must understand, human, they are not mere beasts. They are our partners, our sacred guardians. No outsider has ever been permitted to approach them." "I understand," Marcus said, though his eyes remained fixed on the sky. Something about those shadows called to him, a pull he couldn't explain. They reached the guest quarters as the suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Marcus thanked the ambassador and settled into his rooms, trying to process everything he'd seen. The Valerians were beautiful, graceful, and clearly advanced, but there was something almost fragile about them, as if they were afraid of disrupting some cosmic balance. He was unpacking when he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but melodic, almost like singing. Moving to his window, Marcus saw a dragon landing on a crystalline platform not far from his building. Even at this distance, the creature was breathtaking. Its scales shimmered between deep purple and silver, and its eyes glowed like twin stars. It was easily the size of a small aircraft, but moved with fluid grace. Without conscious thought, Marcus found himself leaving his quarters and making his way toward the landing platform. Security was lighter than he'd expected, perhaps because no one imagined a human would be foolish enough to approach a sacred dragon. The creature, Stellaris, according to the inscription on the platform, was resting with its great head lowered, eyes closed. Up close, it was even more magnificent. The scales weren't just purple and silver, but contained depths of color that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Each breath it took was like a gentle wind. Marcus had always been good with animals. Growing up on a farm before joining the military had taught him to read body language, to approach with respect rather than fear. This was just a very large, very intelligent animal, he told himself. "Easy there, beautiful," he murmured, extending one hand slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon's eyes snapped open, brilliant gold that seemed to look straight through him. For a moment, Marcus was certain he was about to become a very small pile of ash. Then something extraordinary happened. Stellaris lowered his massive head and gently pressed his snout against Marcus's outstretched palm. The contact sent a shock through Marcus's entire body, not painful, but electric, as if every nerve ending had suddenly come alive. The dragon's scales were warm and surprisingly smooth, like polished stone that had been sitting in sunlight. Those ancient eyes regarded him with what could only be described as curiosity, maybe even approval. Impossible. The voice behind him was soft, musical, and filled with absolute shock. Marcus turned to see a Valerian woman standing at the edge of the platform, her violet eyes wide with disbelief. She was smaller than most Valerians he'd met, with silver-white hair that fell in waves to her shoulders. Her skin had the same luminescent quality as the others, but with a warmer tone, like pearl touched with gold. She wore flowing robes of deep blue marked with silver symbols that seemed to glow in the twilight. "You're..." She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You're touching him. Is that a problem?" Marcus asked, though he didn't remove his hand from Stellaris' snout. The dragon seemed to be enjoying the contact, making a sound that was almost like purring. "A problem?" The woman's voice rose an octave. "You're an outsider, a human, and Stellaris is allowing you to touch him. Do you have any idea what this means?" "I'm hoping you'll tell me," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I'm Marcus Chen, by the way." "And you are?" "Naya," she said automatically, then seemed to catch herself. "Naya Silverwind, keeper of the sacred dragons." She moved closer, her eyes fixed on the place where Marcus's hand rested against Stellaris' scales. "This is unprecedented. In 3,000 years, no outsider has ever been permitted to touch a Lumina dragon. They are choosy even with us." "Maybe he's just curious about humans," Marcus suggested, though privately he was amazed by the connection he felt. It was as if Stellaris was somehow communicating with him, not in words but in emotions, images, feelings of ancient wisdom and patient strength. "Curious?" Naya's laugh held a note of hysteria. "Stellaris is the eldest of our guardians. He remembers the first bonding, when our ancestors learned to fly with the dragons. He doesn't do curious." As if to prove her point, Stellaris raised his great head and fixed his golden gaze on Naya. The dragon made a complex series of sounds, almost like speech, and Naya's expression shifted from shock to something approaching awe. "What did he say?" Marcus asked. "He says..." Naya swallowed hard. "He says you have the old gift. The one our people have forgotten." She looked at Marcus with new eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. "He wants to know if you're here to help us remember." "I'm here to build bridges between our peoples," Marcus said. "If that includes remembering old gifts, then I guess I am." Stellaris made that purring sound again and gently nuzzled Marcus's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. The dragon was clearly pleased by this answer. "This is madness," Naya whispered, but she was staring at Marcus with an expression that had nothing to do with diplomatic protocol. "You shouldn't be able to do this. You shouldn't be here, touching him, making him respond like this." "But I am," Marcus said quietly. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Naya looked from Marcus to Stellaris, who was now watching their exchange with obvious interest. The dragon's body language suggested he was enjoying the drama, which Marcus found oddly charming. "We should report this immediately," Naya said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The Council of Keepers must be informed. There will be questions, investigations, protocols to follow. Or, Marcus suggested, we could figure out what it means first. Just the three of us." The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond dragon keeping. Naya's eyes met his, and Marcus felt the same electric connection he'd experienced with Stellaris, but warmer, more personal, infinitely more dangerous. "That would be highly irregular," she said softly. "Sometimes irregular is exactly what's needed," Marcus replied, stepping closer. "I didn't come here to follow protocol, Naya. I came here to build something new." Stellaris chose that moment to stretch his massive wings, creating a canopy of silver and purple above them. The gesture felt deliberate, protective, as if the ancient dragon were shielding them from prying eyes. "He's giving us privacy," Marcus observed. "Dragons don't give privacy," Naya protested, but her voice was breathless. "They're not romantic." "Are you sure about that?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the wing canopy above them. "Because this feels pretty romantic to me." Naya's luminescent skin flushed a deeper gold, and Marcus realized he was falling for her as surely as he'd bonded with Stellaris. The attraction was immediate, undeniable, and completely impossible given their respective positions. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "The best things usually are," Marcus replied, reaching out to touch her cheek with the same gentle confidence he'd shown the dragon. Naya's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Her skin was softer than silk, warm with inner light, and the contact sent the same electric thrill through him that he'd felt with Stellaris. "You're going to change everything," she said, and he couldn't tell if it was warning or promise. "Only if you let me," Marcus said, and leaned down to kiss her. Above them, Stellaris made a sound of deep approval, and the first stars began to appear in the alien sky. Dawn on Valeros brought new challenges and impossible choices. Marcus woke to find Elder Terran waiting in his quarters, the ancient Valerian's silver eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and stern disapproval. Unlike the younger Valerians Marcus had met, Terran's skin bore intricate tattoos that seemed to shift and flow like living mercury, marks of the highest dragon keepers. "You have caused quite a disturbance, human," Terran said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Word of your encounter with Stellaris has reached the Council of Keepers." Marcus sat up, instantly alert despite having slept poorly. Dreams of golden eyes and silver hair had haunted him through the night. "I meant no disrespect, Elder Terran. I was simply—" "You were simply doing what no outsider has done in 3 millennia, Terran interrupted, but his tone held more wonder than anger. "Stellaris has been restless for decades, growing more aggressive with each passing season. Yet last night, for the first time in years, he slept peacefully." The implication hung heavy in the crystalline air. Marcus stood, moving to the window where he could see the dragon platforms in the distance. Several of the magnificent creatures were visible, their scales catching the morning light like living jewels. "What does the council want?" Marcus asked. "Proof," Terran replied simply. "If you truly possess the ancient gift, if Stellaris has chosen you as the prophecies foretold, then you must undergo the trial of winds." "And if I refuse?" Terran's expression softened slightly. "Then you will be asked to leave Valeros immediately, and all diplomatic contact between our peoples will cease. The dragon's judgment is absolute." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Leaving would mean abandoning the mission, yes, but more than that, it would mean never seeing Naya again. The thought was surprisingly painful for someone he'd known less than a day. "What does this trial involve?" "You must fly with Stellaris, without harness or restraint, demonstrating the trust between dragon and rider. It is dangerous even for experienced keepers." "For a human?" Terran shrugged eloquently. "When?" "Today. At noon, when both suns reach their zenith." Terran paused at the door. "Marcus Chen, I should warn you, Naya has requested to be present during the trial. This is highly irregular. She should not involve herself so personally with an outsider." The warning was clear, but Marcus found himself smiling despite the danger ahead. Naya cared enough to risk impropriety. That had to mean something. The morning passed in a blur of preparation and increasingly nervous anticipation. Marcus was fitted with traditional keeper's garments, flowing pants and a vest of some lightweight material that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. He felt ridiculous and magnificent at the same time. When noon arrived, he found himself standing on the great platform, a massive crystalline disk that jutted out from the city's central spire. Below, hundreds of Valerians had gathered to witness either a miracle or a tragedy. Above, dragons circled in complex patterns that spoke of ancient ritual. Naya stood with the other keepers, her silver hair braided with crystals that caught the sunlight. She wore formal robes of deep purple edged with gold, marking her status within the order. Their eyes met across the platform, and Marcus felt that same electric connection that had sparked between them the night before. Elder Theron raised his arms, and the assembled crowd fell silent. "We gather to witness the trial of winds," he intoned, his voice carrying clearly across the platform. "Let Stellaris judge the worthiness of this human who claims the ancient gift." Stellaris descended from above like a falling star, his massive wings creating wind currents that made everyone's robes flutter dramatically. He landed with surprising grace, folding his wings and fixing his golden gaze on Marcus. For a moment, doubt crept in. In the harsh light of day, surrounded by hundreds of skeptical observers, the whole situation seemed insane. He was about to climb onto the back of a creature the size of a building and trust it not to drop him from a fatal height. Then Stellaris made that soft purring sound Marcus remembered from the night before, and the dragon's thought seemed to flow into his mind. Not words, exactly, but impressions of safety, partnership, ancient bonds that transcended species. Marcus walked forward, ignoring the gasps from the crowd, and placed his hand on Stellaris's neck. The dragon immediately lowered himself to the ground, extending one wing like a living staircase. "Show off," Marcus murmured, earning what sounded suspiciously like dragon laughter. Climbing onto Stellaris's back was easier than expected. The dragon's scales provided natural handholds, and something about the creature's movements made Marcus feel completely secure. He settled himself just behind the great head, gripping the raised ridges along Stellaris's neck. "Ready?" he whispered. Stellaris's response was to launch skyward with a powerful thrust that pressed Marcus against his back. The sensation was indescribable, not like flying in a ship, but like becoming part of the sky itself. Wind rushed past them as they climbed higher and higher, the city shrinking below until it looked like a child's toy. Then Stellaris began to show off in earnest. They dove between the crystalline spires, executing turns so sharp that Marcus's stomach lurched. They soared through clouds that tasted of ozone and starlight, climbed so high that the air grew thin and cold. Through it all, Marcus felt perfectly safe, as if Stellaris were an extension of his own body. The dragon's joy was infectious, flowing through their bond like warm honey. This ancient creature, who had lived for millennia, was having fun. And so was Marcus, despite the very real danger. He found himself laughing as they performed a barrel roll that would have been impossible in any human aircraft. But the real test came when Stellaris suddenly folded his wings and went into a free fall. The ground rushed up at them with terrifying speed. Wind screamed past Marcus's ears, and every instinct told him to panic, to try to control the situation somehow. Instead, he forced himself to relax, to trust completely in the bond between them. At the last possible second, Stellaris spread his wings and pulled out of the dive, skimming so low over the platform that Marcus could see the expressions on individual faces. Wonder, fear, and in Naya's case, something that made his heart skip. They climbed again, more sedately this time, and Stellaris began a complex aerial dance that Marcus gradually realized was a form of communication. Other dragons joined them, creating patterns in the sky that spoke of acceptance, of welcome, of bonds that transcended the barriers between species. When they finally landed back on the platform, the silence was deafening. Then Elder Theron began a slow, rhythmic clapping that was quickly taken up by the other keepers, then the entire crowd. "The dragons have spoken," Theron announced. "Marcus Chen of Earth is acknowledged as a true keeper, bearer of the ancient gift." Marcus slid down from Stellaris's back, his legs shaking slightly from adrenaline and the aftermath of the most incredible experience of his life. The dragon nuzzled his shoulder affectionately, then settled into a resting position that somehow managed to look smug. The formal ceremonies that followed passed in a blur. Marcus found himself inducted into the Order of Keepers with surprising speed, given robes and a crystal pendant that marked his new status. But all he really cared about was the way Naya looked at him, pride and something deeper shining in her violet eyes. It was late afternoon before they managed to find a moment alone together. Naya led him to a private garden high in one of the spires, where flowering vines created a natural canopy and the sound of distant water provided a gentle soundtrack. "You were magnificent," she said softly, settling beside him on a curved bench that seemed to have grown from the garden itself. "I've never seen Stellaris fly like that, not even with the most experienced keepers." "He made it easy," Marcus replied, acutely aware of how close she was sitting. "It was like we've been partners for years instead of days." "The bond between keeper and dragon is sacred," Naya said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "It's supposed to develop over years of careful training, meditation, ritual preparation." "Maybe the old ways aren't the only ways," Marcus suggested, echoing his words from the night before. "Maybe sometimes the connection just is." Naya turned to look at him fully, and Marcus felt his breath catch. In the soft light of the garden, she was impossibly beautiful, her luminescent skin glowing like captured moonlight. But it was more than physical attraction. He felt drawn to her mind, her spirit, the careful way she was trying to balance duty with desire. "Is that what this is?" she whispered. "Between us, I mean. A connection that just is." Instead of answering with words, Marcus reached out and touched her face, letting his fingers trace the delicate line of her cheekbone. Her skin was warm silk, and she leaned into his touch with a soft sigh. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know there are protocols, customs, probably a dozen reasons why this is a bad idea." "More than a dozen," Naya murmured, but she made no move to pull away. "You're human, I'm Valerian. You're new to our ways, I'm bound by ancient oaths. You'll probably leave when your mission is complete, and I'll be here forever. What if I don't want to leave?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that neither was quite ready to examine fully. Naya's eyes searched his face as if looking for some sign of certainty in an uncertain universe. "Marcus," she began, but he silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "I know we've only known each other for a day," he said. "I know this is crazy, impossible, all of that. But what I felt today, flying with Stellaris, it wasn't just about the dragon. It was about you, about this place, about the possibility of something I never expected to find." "What possibility?" "Home," he said simply. "For the first time in my life, somewhere feels like home." Naya's eyes filled with tears that caught the light like liquid diamonds. "You don't understand what you're saying. If we pursue this, if there's any truth to what I think you're feeling, it changes everything. Not just for us, but for both our peoples. Then maybe it's time for things to change." This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway. The contact was electric, sending warmth spiraling through both of them. Her lips were soft and sweet, and when she kissed him back with growing confidence, Marcus felt as if he were flying again. They broke apart reluctantly, both breathing hard. Naya's luminescent skin had taken on a rosy glow that Marcus found enchanting. "This is dangerous," she whispered against his lips. "The best things usually are," he replied, echoing his words from the night before. "Marcus." She pulled back slightly, her expression troubled. "There are things you don't know about our culture, about the expectations placed on keepers. I'm not free to choose my own path." "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the garden entrance. They sprang apart just as Elder Theron appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Forgive the interruption," he said, though his silver eyes missed nothing. "Marcus, the council wishes to speak with you about your new duties. And Naya, your presence is requested by the High Priestess." The formal tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Naya rose gracefully, but Marcus caught her hand before she could leave. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Her smile was brilliant but tinged with sadness. "No," she agreed. "But it may be more complicated than either of us imagined." As she walked away, Marcus noticed the way Elder Theron watched him, as if weighing some decision. The old keeper's next words confirmed his suspicions. "Be careful, young Marcus," Theron said softly. "The dragons may have accepted you, but not all of our people will be so welcoming. And Naya, She carries burdens you do not yet understand. What kind of burdens? But Theron was already walking away, leaving Marcus alone in the garden with more questions than answers and the lingering scent of alien flowers that somehow smelled like home. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's trial, 3 weeks of stolen moments and secret meetings that had only deepened the connection between him and Naya. They met in hidden corners of the Dragon Sanctuary, on windswept platforms where only the stars could witness their growing love, in gardens where crystalline flowers bloomed under alien moons. But secrets, Marcus was learning, had a way of revealing themselves at the worst possible moments. He was returning from a morning flight with Stellaris when he found High Priestess Venera waiting in the Keeper's Hall. Unlike the other Valerians he'd met, there was nothing soft or welcoming about her. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her silver hair pulled back in an elaborate crown of braids, and her pale skin bore the deep blue tattoos of the highest religious order. Her eyes, when they fixed on Marcus, were like chips of Arctic ice. "Marcus Chen," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You will come with me. Now." There was no question of refusing. High Priestess Venera was second only to the planetary ruler in terms of power, and her word was law in all matters concerning the dragons and their keepers. Marcus followed her through corridors he'd never seen before, deeper into the heart of the temple complex. They entered a circular chamber where the walls were covered in murals depicting the first bonding between Valerians and dragons. The artwork was breathtaking, but Marcus barely noticed it. His attention was fixed on the figure kneeling in the center of the room. Naya looked up as they entered, and Marcus's heart clenched at the sight of her. She'd been crying, her luminescent skin blotchy and dim. She wore simple white robes instead of her usual keeper's garments, and her wrists bore restraint marks that made Marcus's hands clench into fists. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking a step toward her. "Stay where you are, human," Venera commanded. "You have caused enough damage." "Damage?" Marcus looked between the High Priestess and Naya, trying to understand what he'd walked into. "What are you talking about? Did you think your little romance was secret?" Venera's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Did you imagine that the keepers of 3,000-year-old traditions wouldn't notice when one of their own began sneaking around with an outsider?" Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "Naya. Don't speak to her," Venera snapped. "You've done enough. Do you have any idea what you've cost her? What your selfish desires have destroyed? I don't understand." "Then let me explain." Venera began to pace around the kneeling Naya like a predator circling prey. "Naya Silverwind is not merely a keeper. She is the daughter of the late High Keeper Solon, heir to a bloodline that stretches back to the first dragon bonding. She has been promised in marriage to Yarrick Moonwhisper since childhood, a union that will strengthen the bonds between the two most powerful keeper families." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. "Promised?" "She never said." "Because she was trying to forget her duty," Venera continued ruthlessly. "Because you made her believe she could choose her own path. But there is no choice for those born to serve the greater good." Marcus looked at Naya, willing her to meet his eyes, to deny what the High Priestess was saying. But she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Naya," he said softly. "Is this true?" "The marriage contracts were signed when we were children," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I tried to forget, tried to pretend there was another way, but there isn't," Venera finished coldly. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days. Yarrick Moonwhisper is already traveling here from the northern sanctuaries." "No." The word came out stronger than Marcus intended. "Naya, you don't have to do this. There has to be another way." "There is one way," Venera said, and something in her tone made Marcus's blood run cold. "The Trial of Flames." Even Naya looked up at that, her eyes wide with shock. "High Priestess, you cannot mean." "The ancient law is clear," Venera continued. "If a bonded woman wishes to break her engagement, her chosen mate may challenge for her hand. But the trial is to the death, and no human has ever survived it. What does it involve? Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. You would face the flame dragons of the deep caverns, Venera explained with obvious satisfaction. Ancient creatures of pure fire and fury, untamed and hostile to all outsiders. If you can bond with one of them as you did with Stellaris, and survive the ordeal, then you would have the right to claim Naya as your mate. And if I fail? Then you die, and Naya marries Yarrick as planned. Venera's smile was sharp as a blade. Either way, the problem is solved. Marcus looked at Naya, who was staring at him with a mixture of love and terror. The trial sounded like suicide, but the alternative was watching her marry someone else while he stood by helplessly. When? He asked. Marcus, no. Naya struggled to her feet despite her restraints. The flame dragons have killed dozens of keepers over the centuries. Even the most experienced won't attempt to bond with them. You can't. When? Marcus repeated, his eyes never leaving Venera's face. Tomorrow at dawn, the High Priestess said. But first, you should meet your rival. As if summoned by her words, the chamber's great doors opened to admit a male Valerian who made Marcus feel like a child in comparison. Yarrick Moonwhisper stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the kind of ethereal beauty that made sculptures weep in shame. His skin was pure silver, his hair white as starlight, and his eyes were the deep blue of Arctic ice. He moved with fluid grace, and when he spoke, his voice was like music. So this is the human who thinks to steal my bride, Yarrick said, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of absolute menace. How quaint. She's not your bride, Marcus said, stepping protectively in front of Naya. She's a person, not property to be traded. Jarrek's laugh was beautiful and terrifying. Spoken like a primitive. You understand nothing of our ways, human. Naya was bred for this union, trained from childhood to be the perfect mate for one of royal blood. Do you think your crude affections can compare to a lifetime of preparation? Why don't you ask her? Marcus suggested. For the first time, Jarrek's perfect composure cracked slightly. He looked at Naya with something that might have been uncertainty. You would choose this alien over your own kind? Over duty, tradition, the honor of your family? Naya's voice, when she finally spoke, was steady despite her tears. I would choose love over duty, yes. I would choose someone who sees me as an equal rather than a prize to be won. Jarrek's beautiful features twisted with rage. Then you are a fool, and you deserve whatever fate awaits you. He turned to Marcus. Enjoy your last night, human. Tomorrow, the flames will cleanse our world of your contamination. After he left, the chamber fell into heavy silence. Venera gestured to 2 guards who had been waiting in the shadows. Take her to the chambers of reflection. She will spend the night in prayer and meditation, preparing for either widowhood or marriage. Wait, Marcus called as they began to lead Naya away. Let me speak with her. Please. Venera considered this for a long moment. 5 minutes. No more. When they were alone, Marcus went to Naya and gently cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was cooler than usual, and he could feel her trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have told you about Yarrick, about the arrangement. I wanted to pretend we could have a normal courtship, that I could choose for myself. You can choose, Marcus said fiercely. Tomorrow, I'm going to survive that trial, and then we're going to be together. I promise. The flame dragons, Marcus, they're not like Stellaris. They're creatures of pure destruction, hatred made manifest. They've never bonded with anyone, never shown mercy or kindness. They exist only to burn. Then I'll have to be the first, Marcus said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. I have the gift, right? The ancient connection to dragons. Maybe that's enough. Naya's tears flowed freely now. What if it isn't? What if I lose you to prove a point? I can't live with that. And I can't live knowing you're married to someone else when we could be together, Marcus replied. Some things are worth the risk. He kissed her then, pouring all his love and determination into the contact. She kissed him back desperately, as if trying to memorize the feel of his lips, the taste of his skin. I love you, she whispered against his mouth. I love you too, he replied. And tomorrow, I'm going to prove it to the entire world. The guards returned then, and Marcus watched helplessly as they led Naya away. When they were gone, he found himself alone with High Priestess Venera, who was studying him with calculating eyes. You could still leave, she said quietly. Take your ship, return to Earth, find some human woman who won't cost you your life. Would you? Marcus asked. If someone you loved was in danger, would you run away? Venera's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Once, perhaps, I might have tried to fight for love over duty. But I learned that some prices are too high to pay. Well, I haven't learned that lesson yet, Marcus said. And I don't intend to. He left the chamber then, needing air and space to think. But as he walked through the temple corridors, he could feel eyes watching him from every shadow. Word of the trial had already spread, and by tomorrow, the entire city would know that a human was either going to die spectacularly or achieve the impossible. Outside, the night air was cool and sweet with the scent of night-blooming flowers. Marcus found himself on one of the dragon platforms, where Stellaris was waiting for him. The great dragon lowered his head in greeting, and Marcus pressed his forehead against the warm scales. What do you think, old friend? He murmured. Can I really bond with a flame dragon, or am I about to become the galaxy's stupidest martyr? Stellaris made a complex series of sounds that Marcus had learned to interpret as dragon speech. This time, the meaning was surprisingly clear. The fire dragons are old, angry, forgotten. But they remember the first bonds, the time before fear. Show them respect, not dominance. Show them that connection is possible. Easier said than done, Marcus muttered, but he felt marginally better. If Stellaris believed it was possible, maybe there was hope. He spent the rest of the night in meditation, trying to center himself for what was to come. When dawn broke over the crystalline spires of Lumina, Marcus was as ready as he could be. The deep caverns lay beneath the city, accessible only through a shaft that descended into the planet's molten heart. Marcus stood at the edge, looking down into the red-lit darkness, while hundreds of Valerians gathered to witness either his triumph or his death. High Priestess Venera performed the ritual opening, calling upon ancient laws and older powers. Yarrick stood nearby, resplendent in ceremonial armor, his expression confident. But it was Naya that Marcus focused on, beautiful and terrified in her white robes. Any last words, human? Venera asked. Marcus looked directly at Naya. I'll see you soon, he said. Then he jumped into the darkness, toward fire and fury and the slim chance of forever. The caverns were a maze of molten stone and superheated air. The temperature was barely survivable, even with the protective gear he'd been given. But it was the sound that truly terrified him, a constant roaring like the heart of a star, punctuated by shrieks of rage that spoke of intelligence and endless fury. He found the flame dragons in the deepest chamber, and the sight nearly stopped his heart. They were magnificent and terrible, creatures of living fire whose scales glowed white-hot. Their eyes were like miniature suns, and every breath they took sent waves of heat that would have killed an unprotected human instantly. There were 3 of them, ancient beyond measure, and when they saw him, their rage was immediate and absolute. The largest one, easily twice the size of Stellaris, rose on its hind legs and breathed a column of flame that turned stone to glass. The message was clear, leave or die. But Marcus didn't leave. Instead, he did the most insane thing he could think of. He knelt. I'm not here to conquer you, he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of flames. I'm here to ask for help. There's someone I love, someone worth dying for. I know you understand love, even if you've forgotten how to show it. The dragons paused, surprised by his words and his submissive posture. The largest one stepped closer, heat radiating from its body like a physical force. Why should we care about the loves of mortals? The voice was like the sound of mountains crumbling, speaking directly into his mind. Because you were mortal once too, Marcus replied, the words coming from some deep instinct he didn't fully understand. Before the fire consumed you, before the rage took hold, you knew what it was to choose love over everything else. The dragon's massive head tilted, and for a moment, Marcus saw something other than fury in those solar eyes. Pain. Loss. The memory of choices made long ago. We chose fire over love, the dragon said. We chose power over connection. It has made us strong, but it has made us alone. It doesn't have to be that way, Marcus said, slowly rising to his feet. Connection doesn't make you weak. It makes you complete. He extended his hand, the same gesture that had begun his bond with Stellaris. The heat was so intense that his skin began to blister immediately, but he didn't pull back. The flame dragon stared at his outstretched hand for what felt like eternity. Then, with infinite care, it lowered its great head and touched Marcus's palm with its snout. The contact should have killed him instantly. Instead, it filled him with fire and starlight, with the memory of love strong enough to burn away eons of loneliness. He felt the dragon's pain, its isolation, its desperate hunger for the connection it had abandoned so long ago. And in return, he showed it his love for Naya, his willingness to die for the chance to be with her, the way she made him feel complete. Yes, the dragon whispered, and its voice now held wonder instead of rage. This is what we lost. This is what we forgot. The other two dragons approached then, their flames dimming to a warm glow instead of destructive fury. They touched him as well, adding their voices to the chorus of rediscovered connection. When Marcus finally climbed out of the caverns hours later, supported by 3 flame dragons who had chosen to remember love instead of rage, the assembled crowd fell silent in absolute shock. Well, he said, looking directly at High Priestess Venera, I believe that concludes the trial. Naya broke free from her guards and ran to him, not caring about protocol or proper behavior. Marcus caught her in his arms, spinning her around as the dragons sang overhead, a sound of joy that hadn't been heard in thousands of years. You did it, she whispered against his neck. You actually did it. We did it, Marcus corrected, holding her tight. Love did it. Yarrick stood frozen, his perfect features twisted with disbelief and rage. This is impossible, he snarled. No one has ever tamed the flame dragons. It's a trick, an illusion. The largest flame dragon turned toward him, and when it spoke, everyone in the cavern could hear its voice. There is no trick, Silver One. Only truth. This human has shown us something we had forgotten, that strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing to stand together. High Priestess Venera looked from Marcus to the dragons to Naya, her expression unreadable. Finally, she raised her staff and spoke in the formal tones of religious law. The trial of flames has been completed. The ancient bonds have been renewed. By right of conquest and the will of the dragons themselves, Marcus Chin of Earth is granted the hand of Naya Silverwind, heir to the Keeper bloodlines. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Marcus only had eyes for Naya. Her luminescent skin glowed with happiness, and when she smiled at him, he felt as if he could conquer galaxies. So, he said, cupping her face in his hands, ready to start planning a wedding? Ready to start planning a life, she corrected, and kissed him while dragons sang their approval to the stars. Above them, Stellaris and the 3 flame dragons circled in complex patterns that spoke of new beginnings, of love triumphant, of the understanding that some bonds were strong enough to reshape the world. The age of tradition was ending. The age of chosen love had begun.